evening, everybody. Welcome once again to Kumbukeni. And as usual, I'm with my co-host, Brother Milton Alimadi, Sister Unduku. And on from last week, we continue our conversation, centering on the African continent. And this time we're talking about terra firma, land. How best to start this but to acknowledge what has gone before, i.e., the Scramble for Africa. As we were commonly told in our basic history classes, the Scramble for Africa started in 1884, culminating in what was then became known as the 1885 Agreement, which essentially carved up Africa into what it is now today. For the unaware, Africa was carved up like a Christmas turkey with protocols involved as to what you can have. Someone can have the head, you can have a wing, you can't have two wings. And
unless you're England.
Yes, unless you're the UK.
You can't have the wings, exactly. And unfortunately, the only person that didn't know that was being carved up was the turkey. And that was the Africans.
Right.
And to pass this quite emotive topic today, again, like I said, I have my two co-conspirators, Brother Milton Alimadi and Sister Unduku. I will start with, shall we go to one of...
Brother, before we go there, do you mind if myself and Alimadi introduce ourselves for the audience?
Oh, sorry, my manners.
Yes, please.
You know, I have
No, it's not your manners. It's such such an emotive topic.
The enthusiasm,
I know
right?
you just want to jump
the
into
enthusiasm. That's what
it.
that's.
In fact, all of us, we are controlling our emotions.
Like, I want to jump off my seat.
Okay, so if you can do the protocol, Sister
Sure, absolutely.
Nduku, go first.
Habari gani? It's good to be here with you all. I thank you all for joining us. I see you all in the chat. I appreciate it. I'm not responding immediately because we're managing the show and it's hard to do it in tandem. But I do appreciate all of you. We do appreciate all of you, and we thank you for being here. Again, I am Duku, a co-host with Brother Adesoji, our brother Milton, and we are here to bring you African news from an African perspective. My brother Alimadi.
Yes, absolutely. As we said in our previous show, we need to combine our history to contemporary solutions because some of the blueprints are already available. And today, it's just amazing that we're sitting here in the year 2023, and we are still talking about the land issue when Africa is supposed to have been independent since beginning in the 1960s. So this is a timely topic, as you're going to see when you hear some of the details that many of you are going to be surprised by. Do Africans own the land? Absolutely not. And you're going to hear the details as our show unfolds today. Back to you, Comrade Adesoji.
Oh, yes. I was getting carried away, as you said. My name is Adesoji, and I'm a co-host with my co-conspirators, like I introduced them earlier. Now, funny enough, some would argue that when Africa was being carved up, what did Africa do that they didn't defend the land? But I'll let you into a tiny secret. Part of the menu or etiquette that followed the menu was the fact that they had a gentleman's agreement. There were no ladies involved, by the way.
And the gentlemen are not gentle at all.
So they had an agreement between them that, yes, we're going to carve up the land. If you're going in, you have to tell us where you're going so that we don't cross path. And if you do get in there, remember, do not, and we repeat, do not sell anybody arms because I mean, it won't be a fair fight if the Africans can defend themselves, would it be? So again, one of the principal places that South Africa, the British went in first was the South, the Cape. And it was led by a man known as Cecil Rhodes. But we're coming back to the issue of South Africa. But we'll go a little bit north because the man made a promise. He said, I see myself stretching from here, from the Cape to Cairo. And there's a little tiny part of that
the caucasity of
land,
it all.
that landscape. I mean, what's a man without his boast? Come on. So the man said, let me stop here first and talk to the natives. Sorry, they were not natives at that time. They were still savages.
They had not been upgraded yet.
Exactly. There's a progression. So savages first. So let me speak to the savages. And what did he do? He chased the people of Ndembele and the Mashonas out of their land and carved up a little tiny place called South Rhodesia, which is today modern-day Zimbabwe. But before we go into that, I will ask my sister to key up our discussion with a tiny little clip.
All right, brother.
Can you go ahead, please?
I will. We're talking about the Goodbye Rhodesia?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, what can we say?
You don't give up your country, she said. Which one is the?
So, was there more to it, or should we go back to it?
No, I think that's good.
No. That's good enough.
Okay.
There were some key bits where the lady said, "This is my country. I know no other country, and I'm going to die here."
Yes, indeed. Kiss of love, the caucasity of it all. You are right. The caucasity to sit there and say, this is my land. You're an invader, an illegal immigrant. That's your language, an illegal immigrant. Go ahead, brother.
You would share her sentiments if you had 19 million hectares of arable land for 52,000 people, as opposed to 3 million hectares for 1.1 million Africans. You will share her sentiment. That is why she said she was willing to die. So when the US and the EU placed sanctions on Zimbabwe in 2001 and 2002, respectively, what they were enshrining was the fact that we can take this land off you and keep our proceeds of crime. Because the only place where one can keep their proceeds of crime is in Africa. As long as you're doing it to steal the savages. And in mind, they've not started reading yet, so we can't exactly call them natives yet. But can I just go to Brother Milton first? What do you think?
Okay, so in fact, I'm glad you talked about the size of the land. I traveled with a delegation to Zimbabwe in 2002. In fact, I was I was not like a bystander. I was actually involved in putting together this delegation. Around that time, it looked like Britain was determined to have South Africa invade Zimbabwe. And to his credit, I must say, Thabo Mbeki did not fall for that British pressure. I think it was Blair at that time. And so I felt the Zimbabweans needed some publicity in the US. to avoid being invaded. It was, if you read what was going on in the media at that time, you could see it was, imminent.
Ominous. Yep.
So I went to a city council member, Charles Barron. At that time was a city council member. Then later he became a state assembly member. And I said, listen, why don't you organize a delegation of prominent African-American leaders, including yourself, and let's go to Zimbabwe. And from there also, he actually invited President Mugabe to come to City Hall and address the city council. But the point I was trying to emphasize is when I traveled to Zimbabwe and we went to the rural areas, first of all, going there, I have to back up a little. Because if you read the media, if you follow media closely at that time, you'd get the impression that every African was attacking any European in sight, right? The images we saw on TV, what you read, including so-called responsible media, like the Times, New York Times, or BBC. When we got to London, and then we are flying Air Zimbabwe to Harare, I was saying to myself, wait a minute, how come the plane is filled with all these Europeans? No, really. How are they going to a country
They've
where
lost
you
their
get the
way.
impression that every European is being attacked on the street? So that was my number one surprise. And then we land in Zimbabwe, walk around in Harare, see Europeans not being molested, just walking around freely. So that is the disconnect with the reality on the ground and what you get if you only follow corporate media. And then here's the major point I wanted to point out, because you brought up the size of the land. At one point, we were driving in the rural area. And even along in the rural area, you find the roadside vendors who make these beautiful carvings, marble, wood. And who are the people buying?
The white man.
Europeans.
The invader.
Or vendors in the rural area where they're supposed to be unsafe. So, I've always known about the disconnect between corporate media and the reality on the ground. But even I was shocked at what I saw on the ground. But here's the final point. The land, the size. We drove at some point for miles and miles, right? We tried to get to a location. And then somebody told me that this land belongs to one farmer.
Hey.
After we had driven for miles. On the right side and on the left side. And my question was, how can any one person use all this land? And the driver said, that is the problem. They don't use all this land. They only use a tiny proportion of it. But since they own it, it's fenced off and is not used by anybody else. So that's the main point I wanted to make in reaction to your turning over the mic to me.
Yes. Speaking to the issue of turning owning of the amount of land by one person. Something also in researching for this topic, something also jumped out was the fact that there was apartheid by stealth. And when I mean apartheid by stealth, because that land was invariably owned by one person, what you then have is you are not allowed as an African to live within that vicinity except you are slave labor. So, Sister Nduku, could you speak to the idea that someone will have to travel for miles to come and work on a farm, knowing the history of the United States? Does that sound familiar? Can you begin to see a pattern?
Are we talking about the sharecroppers in the US?
There you go.
Yeah. So these invaders, their culture, and it is a culture because they all are practicing this behavior, this inhumane behavior. Their culture is, and I'm having a hard time finding the words.
Eurocentrism.
It's void. I'm trying to show the depth of just the lack of morals. It is completely void of morals. And their goal is not to better the world. They are so blinded by their greed and individualism that they don't see that their actions are destroying themselves too. They don't see that. And so as you ask me this question, first of all, I'm growing up in Africa, in Kenya, and knowing my grandma and I used to walk. We had relatives in distant places. We would walk 3 miles. It was enjoyable. I'm walking with my grandma. It's beautiful. But to think about walking, for example, 10 miles. Is that the distance, Adesoji, 10 miles?
Mm-hmm.
10 miles. They probably did not have good shoes because we know these invaders are not providing the resources. They're not caring for them. They just want them to show up for work. Probably didn't have good shoes. Probably didn't have any shoes. And probably had to do it first thing in the morning to be there on time to produce for these people, these invaders. So to imagine, because I know the history, it was the men who were taken out of their families to go to do this work. It was the women taken out of their families away from their children to do this work. It was the children taken out of their families to go to do this work. To walk more than 10 miles every morning, early in the morning, God knows what is on the road, on the way to this thing they're calling work. And then they were not being paid well. Actually, they were not being paid because, as you know from the story of sharecroppers, you end up being taxed and you end up owing so much that they take out of your salary, you end up with nothing, right? So you've spent all these hours working all day, having walked all that way there, and then you end up taking nothing home to your family. And by the way, let's not forget the fact that they have denied you from growing your own food because God forbid that you are competition. So they give you the scraps and then you walk again those 10 miles later in the evening home. You are so exhausted. You cannot even, you want to get home from work, show your family love, be there for you. You cannot even do that. So yes, that is my response, brother.
But sister, even worse than that, you're working on land that was yours.
It is your
as you know, you're going to when you get into Kenya.
Hold on. I am showing up to work. Hold on, Adesoji. I am showing up to work under the mindset that apparently now what belonged to me, what it still belongs to me, is owned by someone else who has invaded.
Yeah.
I was coming to that. I would not use the terminology invader. They're imperialist. When you say invader, you're invariably saying somebody just incurs into your spots. They might have done it unintentionally, but that is the mindset. Imperialism is a mindset.
Imperialism, brother. Thank you for the correction.
Imperialism is a mindset. The idea that I can go wherever I want to go. But when you invade, you trespass. It's almost like a trespass.
The invasion is to
I didn't mean to.
No, it's fine. Yeah. Invasion is to execute the agenda of imperialism.
Exactly.
So they go hand in hand.
Exactly. So when you mentioned the idea of being forced to work, laws were put in place called the vagrancy laws. They're Vagrant Act laws. So which means if you're standing around, just basically whistling and doing what, you'll be pulled up, cited.
Imagine that.
You have to pay a fine. Where do you get the fine from? You have to go and work.
God forbid you take a break. God forbid you take a break to catch your breath.
No, who are you going to work for? You're going to work for the very person who stole your land.
Precisely. And in Kenya,
we're coming.
They introduced but it ties into what you're saying. They introduced the Kipande system.
Exactly.
Kipande where once you reach the age of 16, you wear a dog tag.
Yep.
On your neck, a necklace, a dog tag, to indicate that you are old enough to be part of the labor system. So I just wanted to connect that with your point. Please, back to you.
Not to mention the symbolism, that this is a tag they had on their animal. So essentially, they are seeing you as an animal.
Thank you for tying that, right?
Go ahead, Brother Adesoji. This is,
so
listen.
And the brother is saying, am I going to be allowed to talk by these two?
To keep my hands on the side is
you're the one that brought up. You're the one that brought up this hot topic. So don't blame us if we
I didn't know people on you.
Go on, brother.
I didn't know people were going to be this emotive. Well, so it doesn't seem as if we're talking in out of sync. A vacuum. I would recommend some texts for people who want to read deeper with regards to this particular subject, especially as far as Zimbabwe is concerned. One very entry-level book is titled "The Struggle for Zimbabwe," written by David Martin. It's a very old book. You might be able to get it on Abbey Books or wherever, or any old bookstore. The title of the book again is "The Struggle for Zimbabwe."
Comrade, is that David Martin a journalist? He was a journalist, right?
Yes.
Okay, he wrote a book also, a good book if people wanted to know more about Idi Amin. He wrote a book called, the title was also Idi Amin.
Yes.
His name is David Martin?
David Martin. He wrote the book. Titled "The Struggle for Zimbabwe." You could also read White Supremacy Confronted by Gerald Horne. Professor Gerald Horne.
Slow down on that resource delivery. That would be nice. Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Professor Gerald Horne, of course. Is a great comrade. No, really. I want people to get his full kudos and credentials. People, please Google him. I'm glad you brought up his name. Look up.
What's that Gerald Horne book again?
Confronting White Supremacy. White Supremacy Confronted.
Okay, thank you.
And Horne, I believe it's spelled Horne. I think there's an E at the end.
Yeah.
White Supremacy Confronted. Go ahead, brother.
So White Supremacy Confronted. Well, seeing that we've talked about Zimbabwe, I think we're going to need strong coffee or perhaps tea of the British flavor. Maybe a Lipton or Tetley or Yorkshire tea.
Why are you testing me? Go ahead.
Seeing as we are going next,
get to the point.
Yeah, I see somebody also typed in the Gerald Horne book in the comments. Karen.
Yeah. Thank you. Kiss of love. Yeah, thank you. Karen is good. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you. This is a community effort. Thank you.
There we go. As they will say, each one teach one. So yes. Which brings me to the next point of conflict.
Oh Lord.
Kenya.
Is it breaking news?
I think he wants Kenya now.
Yes. Could you?
He's provoking you further.
He sure is.
Could we go to Nairobi International, Jomo Kenyatta International, please?
We have some breaking news. Hold on. Brace yourselves.
Excellent. Can't wait.
Well, this speaks to the fact that you were talking about the media last week and how the media portrays Africa in positive light, as it were. So,
all right, let me know when you're ready for us to share with our audience.
Go on.
This breaking news.
Go on. Yes.
In Nairobi, capital of Kenya, Europeans and Africans still walk the streets in fear of the dreaded Mau Mau.
Dreaded.
It is that band of fanatics whose bloody deeds have cast a dark shadow across the face of Kenya.
Dark shadow. Bloody deeds.
The people of Kenya read of the death of Chief Nderi, murdered by terrorists.
There's a key part, murdered by terrorists.
Of this wise and peaceful chieftain, they wonder where next.
There's a key part here coming in here. That place cracks me up anytime I hear it. One of their objectives Okay.
Troops are in the streets of Nairobi. Sir
Yay.
Evelyn Baring, the governor, salutes the
Rescue,
men of the
rescue.
Fusiliers who have flown in to help clear his colony of the Mau Mau menace, which has struck fear into Kenya's very heart.
Ooh.
Nairobi police have been supplemented by hundreds of civilians, many of them women, to help round up the Mau Mau bandits. Radio-controlled
Mau Mau
cars with
bandits.
armored vehicles are used to carry out the army's plans for bringing in all suspects. More than 3,500 have been arrested already. All have to be carefully checked by police security men, for in such
Carefully
a decisive
checked.
swoop as this, it is all too easy for the innocent to suffer.
And that's
The
exactly what
innocent.
happened.
The innocent.
Society is
Lord.
to drive all white men out of Kenya.
Is
Not
to
only
drive all white
fanatics
men out of
fill the
Kenya.
ranks
Why
of
would
the
you
Hold
want
on,
to do
hold
that?
on, hold on. Let's just pause there. Brother
One
Adesoji,
of the objectives.
is to drive
Yeah.
all white men out of Kenya. White
Right.
man, what are you doing in Kenya?
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, but
Right. No,
Many
no,
have
no.
joined from
Let me also add,
Yes.
if you Google articles that were covered, written in the New York Times around that part, that was the same British propaganda,
Mhm.
quoted verbatim. So if you read Time magazine articles around that time, and then you read the New York Times, verbatim, their goal is to drive the white man out of Kenya. There's no mention or
Duh.
rarely mention of the land issue, right?
Duh.
at all,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
was
yes.
which
Africans
which
just
is
woke
the-
up one day and they said, you know what? After X years of colonialism, today
we
I'm
just want to
feeling
drive out the white man.
no more white man.
No context, nothing. There's a
Oh,
particular
sister,
name.
now we are piling up on you. Please go ahead.
There's a-
Listen,
Finish your
there's
video.
you
there's a
all
particular
know
na- there's a
I do not
particular
need to
name
go
I want.
to my doctor today, so please take it easy. Go on, Adesoji.
There's a particular name I want you to Google. The name is Tom Luch. Tom Luch.
Spell it
He
for
was the
listeners.
editor. So Tom is spelled Tom. Luch is spelled Luce. He was the editor of the New York Times during that time you mentioned. If you go,
Luch. Wait, but that's familiar. That sounds familiar. Isn't that the editor of Time magazine?
Time magazine,
Oh.
correct?
Right,
yes.
right.
The
Yeah.
current
If you
editor?
go,
No. At that time.
no, at
Okay.
that time.
Yeah.
So if you Google his writings, you will
Yeah.
see what he said about the Mama, the
Mm.
menace.
He was a reactionary. He was a supporter of what's his name? Chiang Kai-shek also.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do
against-
Very
you
much.
Against Mao, right?
yeah, you all want me to stay for the rest of the show, right?
Go on. Yes,
All right.
go on.
Please.
Yes. Continue.
Silence from me. Silence.
Okay.
fear. Day after day, hour after hour, lorries bearing police and troops drive away from the capital and head for the country. Along twisting roads, they travel deeper, ever deeper into the heart of the African jungle. For here, many of the Mau Mau are hiding. Overhead, aircraft join in the search. All who carry the mark of the Mau Mau must be hunted out so that peace may come to this troubled colony.
The mark of the Mau Mau.
They have
Hunted.
no marks. That's
Hunted
pure
out.
propaganda.
Wondering
Sister,
what's
that was short but deep.
Hunted out. Hunted. I mean, you all audience, like
The
one
Mama.
minute. Adesoji, before I hand it to you. Hunting. What do we hunt? As human beings, what do we hunt? Normally. The
Prey.
standard. What do
Animals.
we hunt?
The last time I checked, there was no jungle in Kenya.
No.
It's plain. It's plain. It's the plain lands, isn't it? What jungle?
Go ahead, brother. Are you handing it over to me, or you have a few words to say before you go?
well, what can I say? I'm not quite familiar with that neck of the woods, and I would not want to
To step
how
on
can I
my
say?
toes.
Portray my imperialistic tendencies. So I
Listen.
will yield the mic to you on that to that neck of the woods.
You cannot be
So
an
what
invader while criticizing invaders.
No. So what do you think? Was that the honest assessment of what transpired?
So,
It is, yes.
the Kenya Land and Freedom Army.
Who is
The
that?
Kenya Land, again, I will say, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, who are demonized as the Mau Mau by the British and the rest of the West. I will say one more time, the audience, what they are truly known, what they called themselves, what our ancestors, my ancestors, because I am Kenyan, and my fellow Kenyans' ancestors, called themselves, and what their mission was: the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. So I'm going to, as I was preparing for the show, doing research, reading books, I wish I could show you the pile. And you know what? Later, once the show is over, you can come back to the chat because I'll add all these books there for you all, because it is hard to stay in this moment of passion and do admin work for the live stream. So let's just make a deal right now. No more putting up book names, book titles. I will add them to the chat later. Come back later, subscribe, and I will also have there our Patreon, because this is so. My passion does not allow me to go to admin today. So I will put our Patreon account in the chat. I will put all the information you need in the chat. Come back later, subscribe, because by subscribing, you're supporting us. By supporting us, you're allowing us to continue doing this work. In fact, if you support us, to the point where we actually can make an income from this and not be taken away by the 9-to-5 jobs, we can be here to do the research that is required to provide this information for you.
That would be
Sorry,
too
sister.
much.
So
That would be too much trouble.
No, let me give her a hard time.
He wants to
She's
be a
saying
troublemaker.
we won't be taken away to the 9-to-5. So you're admitting to the world that we're actually subsidizing the system by working for the man. You're admitting that.
I am admitting, unfortunately, that I am embedded in the social structure. I am embedded in capitalism. I am embedded. I am living with the invaders. Yes, unfortunately.
Yes, but that's what it takes for now. But I support what you're saying. If the people, the audience, can help liberate us, we also
will
be able to better liberate the audience.
And saying that also, for those of you who are following us in other platforms, look out for our campaign. It's going to be going out on Monday. The goal is to have a minimum of 1,000 followers, because as you know how YouTube works, when you get to 1,000, you start making subscribers on YouTube. You start making money. You start generating income on YouTube. Listen, we're just trying to be real with you all. We need to make money in order to step away from the social structure and come and start providing you all with the information you need from an African perspective. So I'll go back to the
well put.
topic for today. And like I was saying, when I was doing research, I got to one of the books I was reading, and I'll put the information. And I said,
Dedan Kimathi.
Yes, that is my ancestor. That is my hero.
It was considered a terrorist, wasn't it?
I am correcting that narrative. He is my ancestor. He is my hero. He fought for my freedom and the freedom of all Kenyans. He fought to get our land back. Our land.
Yep.
All right. Yep. So I got to a point where I was reading a letter. It was written by Warohio Itote. Warohio Itote was a member of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army.
Yep.
And at the moment when he wrote, the point where he was writing this letter, he was imprisoned by the British. And they called themselves at that point the Kenyan government, the Kenyan parliament. Yep. And so he writes this letter, and he means for it to go to Dedan Kimathi. And he's pleading with Dedan Kimathi. You can tell the letter has been written under duress. It is clear. If you want to analyze, if you see the language, for those of you who are skilled at doing that, you will tell, this man is not writing this letter. He has been instructed on what to put here.
Right.
So I'll read that letter, and then I'll go ahead and read the response that comes from the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. The members of the army who resided in Nyandarua, which is a part of Kenya, at the time, which is where Mzee Warohio, who is now in prison, was from, they reach out to Dedan Kimathi. They walk from Nyandarua to where Dedan Kimathi was. He was the leader of the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. I mean, notice all these African ways, the respect, the protocol. They don't just decide by themselves. They walk to their leader's location and they share this news and they give him the letter. They let him know that Mzee Warohio is in prison and he has a letter for him. And then Dedan reads it and collectively, they put together their response, and I will read it. I'm going to start with a letter from Mzee Warohio. And I will provide the information later again in the chat. If you come back, with this recording will be there, you'll find the information. All right. Dear Kimathi, you must have learned that on 15th January, I was injured and captured. I am now writing you. Yes, brother. Let's let the ancestor speak. I am now writing you from the police custody. I have tried to present our demands to the government through their interrogation. At this stage, I understand the government is quite willing to put down arms and discuss our difficulties, and if possible, settle them in peace. Firstly, I am very worried about the lives of our fighters, for we are losing hundreds of lives daily. If you agreed with me, we had better stop this bloodshed. Below are questions which the government has asked me. To answer these questions, I would like you to send 2 representatives from Nyandarua and 2 from Kirinyaga, who will answer the questions and negotiate about the general surrender in which I would be a participant. Why are you fighting? What must be done so that all fighters will come out of the forest with all their arms? What would you do if you fail to get land and freedom? If you achieved land and freedom, what would you do to that Ashia Boruri, which is Kikuyu for loyalist, traitors, home guards? Would you agree to suspend the fight during the talks? For the government is willing and ready to stop the fight until the end of the talks. Do you see this as a government trap? If you continue to fight to the last man's drop of blood, who would then be given land and freedom? I have promised the government that the talks will be successful, and now I expect to come to the end of our fight and try peaceful talks to settle our demands. Don't let me down on that account. Yours, Warohio Itote. As I'm reading that, and Brother Adesoji, as you point out, the 15th of January, I cannot help but realize that nothing is by coincidence. This letter was written by Warohio on the 15th of January, or he was imprisoned on the 15th of January. Today is the 15th of January. As I read this letter, I am thinking of Dr. King and the struggle and his movement, and today is his birthday. I'm telling you, audience, nothing is by coincidence. Nothing at all. So I continue to the response by the collective, by the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, because they have been asked by the British, under the disguise that this is coming from their brother Warohio Itote. They have been sent questions that they need to respond to. All right. Our ancestors speak. We are fighting for our lands. The Kenya Highlands, which was stolen from the Africans by the Crown through the Orders in Council 1915 of the Crown Lands Ordinance, which evicted Africans from their lands at present occupied by the settlers or reserved for their future generations, while landless Africans are starving of hunger or surviving on the same land as the cheap laborers to the settlers who were granted that land by the Crown. Let me catch my breath. Hold on. Before we come out of the forest, the British government must grant Kenya full independence under the African leadership and also hand over all the alienated lands to Kenya African government, which will redistribute the land to its citizens. If we do not get land and freedom now, we will continue to fight till the government yields or the last drop of blood of our last fighter is spilled. If we achieve land and freedom, we would forgive all the Vatashia Boruri, that is the loyalist traitors, home guards, I call them today gatekeepers, for we are sure that they are either foolish or they have not other ways of ensuring their lives under your government other than to kill and destroy as instructed by your officers. We have a battle song, and here comes the African ways of knowing. We have a battle song which says, "Choose the whites, save the blacks, for they are working under their foolishness." After all, we are certain that all these loyalists are our real brothers, sisters, parents, in-laws, and our beloved friends. Blood is thicker than water. Our traditional beliefs cannot allow us to part with our relatives. The following Kikuyu saying will prove this to be true. Rorira, rotidaba gioroi, which means in English, the navel cord can never be washed away in a river. Meaning that one cannot under any circumstances deny his relative. Even if one went to wash himself in a river, he would still remain the same blood he is trying to denounce. Or, a Swahili saying, mwana wa nyoka ni nyoka, which means the snake's son is still a snake.
Mm-hmm.
Now it is
Very much
wartime.
so.
And war means destruction of everything without recognizing children or their parents. War simply means taking away lives and wealth. The most civilized and advanced nations have failed to stop war as they believe the war is the only safeguard against slavery, oppression, and exploitation by others. War seems to be a natural rule, the survival of the fittest to all creatures. We are not going to stop fighting during the negotiation talks. Both will continue until an agreement is reached by our representatives in the talks, who could only convince us to stop fighting. Yes, we have seen that it is a government trap. They know at this point that the letter from Waruri was a trap. They are saying this right here. Yes, we have seen that it is a government trap, but we will throw a stick of wood in it and see its reaction. If we could release the spring, we shall walk over it safely. It is now almost 1.5 years since the declaration of the emergency. Every day since then, you have been trying your best to destroy us completely, using nearly 100,000 strong forces and dropping thousands of bombs on us from your jet fighters, Harvards, and the heavy Lincoln bombers. All your forces work day and night trying to finish us off, but our God is great, and you have not been successful, and you will not succeed. Though you think we are unarmed compared to your strength, we stand for right, and God will defend the right. We are confident of our victory. Even if you kill all the central province people, the now quiet Kenya tribes will still demand land and freedom. I am one of those quiet Kenyan tribes, the Akamba. And yes, if I was living then and I found out that the Kikuyu were finished from the land, and I knew the land was not ours, it had been taken. It was ours, but it had been taken. I would fight for the land. So it continues. It is inevitable. You may lose your empire in the course of impeding Kenya's independence. If you want us to negotiate with you, you must firstly disarm the home guards and remove your forces completely out of the central province, where they are killing women and children, raping and robbing them, and forcing them here in the forest to fight with us. Secondly, demolish the newly established unsanitary villages, police posts, and military bases, and let every person return to his former homestead. Thirdly, release all the revolution prisoners and detainees. Fourthly, open all the schools you have closed down. Again, they closed down the schools. Open all the schools you have closed down. Fifthly, bring D.N. Pritt, A.R. Kapila, and Ralph Bunch to the negotiation talks so that they will advise and draft our agreement. Finally, we would like to meet Mr. Jomo Kenyatta or his representative from Lokitaung, Mr. Chief Koinange, Mr. James Beata, Mr. E.W. Matho, MLC, Mr. W.W.W. Awaori, MLC, and Mr. W. Odede, MLC. We demand the signatures of all the persons mentioned in this letter confirming their participation in the negotiation talks. There will be no negotiation talks in the absence of the above mentioned people. And our ancestors sign off. I hand it to you, brothers, to respond to those letters.
Okay, brilliant. I wanted to say just, a few things concerning the letter. The first thing I like to say is actually about Dedan Kimathi himself. The level of intelligence and sophistication has not been fully appreciated. Of course, he was seen as their leader, referred to as a field marshal, and a very capable leader. And this insurgency lasted for 7+ years. And yes, a whole decade.
Yeah.
And what did they face? They faced the British Army. They faced what they call the King's African Rifles, African soldiers from neighboring countries like
Sudan.
Uganda, Sudan, brought in to fight against them. Troops brought from India to fight them. And yet they were winning against all these odds. And of course, ultimately they won because Kenya, they won partially. And that's the other issue, because the land issue has still not been resolved. But Kenya won formal independence because of the resistance in 1963. Kimathi was only 36 years old when he was executed on February 18, 1957. Imagine, 36, Our young people were very dynamic, very visionary in that era, which is a subject that we need to revisit when we couldn't do a whole show.
We have our extended conversations
on Africa's youth, and how they need to take examples from the generation of the Kematis who were able to accomplish this in the 1950s. And then finally, my comment on the letter itself. The letter was the British really pleading, right? And you don't plead like that if you think this is a force that you can overwhelm. So at least at that point, the outcome of this war was not, even to the British, had not been resolved. They did not believe they could win militarily. Otherwise, you don't write a letter like that, And then I guess they managed to assemble overwhelming force from around the world to ultimately penetrate, infiltrate, get enough traitors to betray Kimathi. As you know, one of the individuals who revealed his whereabouts and got him wounded and captured was a fellow Kenyan, of course. And just as an aside, that individual was rewarded by the British with money, of course. He got his gold. And then he started a business, a trucking business. That trucking business went out of business because every Kenyan said nobody should do business with this traitor.
With this guy.
You
exactly.
See? And that to me is a lesson that is enduring, that we need to also learn in other situations when our fighters are betrayed. We should not reward those who betray them to the enemy. So that's the point I would like to make about this letter and the response.
Thank you for reading the letter. Again, history has a way of recording itself and stays with us without us actually noticing. It becomes part of what we are. There's a place in Nairobi called Kibera. There's a reason for the existence of Kibera. Kibera is a legacy of what that time entails, which was the fact that the British lived in segregated enclaves. The King's Rifles that you acknowledge that came in to help them, quote unquote, fight the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army were not even allowed to stay near the Europeans. So they literally had to stay on the gun range. Kibera used to be part of a gun range. So Kibera then extended out sideways because it couldn't go into the European reserved area. And what is Kibera today? It is one of the largest slums on the African continent, if not the world.
This is I will add, brother, quickly before hold on, Adesoji, quickly before you continue. I will add, because they use these terms. Language is very important.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
These
Okay, sister, calm down.
Yes, we know who we are. The
Legacy,
imperialists, brother
a legacy.
Adesoji. Hold on, Adesoji. The imperialists. I want to speak on Kibera real quick, Adesoji, before you go on. We are at 3 minutes to the hour. We're going to be done at 1:30. So I will let you speak. Kibera, it is called a slum, but Kibera, if you're in Kenya, if you're visiting Kenya, is a place where you can go and eat amazing nyama choma. Nyama choma is grilled meat. You can go to Kibera and get beautiful braids if you're in Kenya. You can go to Kibera and shop some amazing African attire. So Kibera, although known as a slum, has a lot of richness in it. It has human beings in it. It has families, mothers, fathers, and children. Go ahead, brother.
Right. No, I just want to add to that too. I was going to say something about that too. And this is particular for listeners, our audience. In our show here, so for example, you saw how we deconstructed that term, Mau Mau. The sister explained to you that was not a term native to Kenya. Nobody even knows what the word means. My own speculation is that this was a word designed by some British public relations experts who knew just a concocted African-sounding word that would invoke menace and peril. And that's how they came up with Mau Mau, to demonize the Kenyans. So on this show, we make it a habit to deconstruct anything and everything. So, the brother is right. Kibera is referred to as a slum. But when you hear terms like that, now you look at our sisters and brothers in Brazil. I forgot the name of that one. What's it called in Rio?
The favelas.
You go. Exactly. We need to challenge at any point any terminology that the establishment have used to try to keep our people in a certain umbrella. So that was good.
So suffice to say, Kenya is living out a colonial legacy, as it is mostly a cash crop economy, which means it produces stuff that it doesn't in itself consume, but for the European market, tea, avocados, flowers, which you also know, fresh flowers.
Yep, that's a big multi-billion-dollar business.
Exactly. So if you go into any supermarket and you want to profess your love to your European maiden, you can get some fresh flowers from Kenya. Well, on a very lovely note, the land question does not stay just on the eastern side. We'll go south rather, to a place known as the Mandela country.
Correct. Which
South Africa.
Sobukwe.
Robert Sobukwe. Yes, please, brother, mention him.
Called Azania. And Robert Sobukwe, for people who are not familiar, was the founder and president of the Pan-Africanist Congress. And we may have occasion to delve more into his legacy.
We will.
Richly deserved legacy in a future podcast, but people can look him up as Sobukwe, Sobukwe, Robert Sobukwe. One of the casualties of the struggle against apartheid. Yes, Professor Sobukwe. Who was in fact actually the leader of the resistance that resulted in the Sharpeville massacre, when he got South Africans to come out for a peaceful protest because they were forced to carry that humiliating internal passport. In your own country, you carry an internal passport. He said, and everybody hated it, the Africans. So he said, let's show up and surrender and burn these passports, called the passbooks, burn it in front of the police stations and submit ourselves to be arrested. And he knew, of course, it would overwhelm the police system, and that would then start a tradition of the, what he called active peaceful resistance. It's not passive, it's very active.
It sounds like what they're doing in Kenya with the dog tags.
Exactly. There you go.
Time.
Right. Yeah.
And I bring this up because to say to the ANC, the African National Congress, which of course is now the government in place, actually opposed Sobukwe's past book resistance. They opposed it. They said, no. It was only after the massacre and the global condemnation of South Africa that the ANC started taking credit, even though it had opposed the march that resulted in the massacre. So I just wanted to give Sobukwe his props as well. South Africa, it's a shame that we speak today in the year 2023. The population, the European population of South Africa, it's about 8%, yet still control 72% of the land. It's not a mistake.
Could you repeat that number, please?
72. It is 72% of
a minority controlling
8%. And that's the whole tragedy, of course. South Africa, of course, was seized in the 17th century when Africans in their humanity invited Dutch travelers who were circumnavigating the southernmost tip of the continent to go to Asia, actually, right? For the spice trade, to go to India and China. Said, you can use a piece of land here as a resting spot. That's how it started, a resting spot. And then they kept encroaching, and started fighting the people who had said, you can use this piece of land. And that's how the history of colonizing evolved in South Africa. And then in the 1880s, the British and the Dutch fought bloody wars in South Africa over land and minerals that didn't belong to them.
To them.
To see who would control the diamond and the gold. The first, they call it the Boer War. South Africans, the Dutch were called the Boers, B-O-E-R. So the first war was 1880 to 1881. The Dutch, the Boers won. The British recognized, that, okay, this segment of South Africa you own, And then the British, of course, we just went back to replan and to rearm. Came back, they fought the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902. This time the British won, and they used a tactic that became very, very, that was later refined in Nazi Germany. They used the concentration camps. They confined thousands of Dutch. Almost 30,000 were killed. So if they were willing to kill 30,000 fellow Europeans, you can imagine how many Africans paid the price to resist this imperialism. But then in 1910, the British and the Dutch came together, just like the Europeans had come together at the Berlin Conference that you mentioned during the Scramble for Africa. So why are we fighting amongst ourselves, right? We should unite so that we can subjugate the African majority. Let them work these mines, and we both benefit from the resources of the mine. And that's what they did. They formed the Union of South Africa, controlled by the British and the Europeans. And the agreement was more like, let the Dutch, the Boers control the politics, and let the English, dominate the economy, right? And then in 1948, 1948, they formalized the system. Apartheid was born. And of course, by that time, they took a lot of the so-called scientific narrative and argument from Nazi Germany, right? But what had happened in 1913, they passed what they call the Native Lands Act. Native Lands Act. Now, it sounds like something that would benefit the so-called natives, but it was the exact opposite. It banned them from owning land in most parts of the country. And that is how the European population ended up owning 87% of the land. 1913, we are talking about. What the Secretary General of the ANC at that time said, it made the African majority pariahs in their own land of birth, right? So let's fast forward a little, because part of the in-between narrative we can deal with in subsequent shows. But by 1994, when Nelson Mandela is elected the first president of independent South Africa, because to me, the pre-1994 era is just colonial era, right? So Mandela is elected, and the ANC government promised that within 5 years, they would have redistributed 30% of the land within 5 years. So let's take this quiz, and I'll start with you, Sister Nduku. Within 5 years, how much of the land do you think had been redistributed? Quick, you have 3 seconds.
It must be a lot. None.
2. Okay, you say none. Brother, you have 3 seconds. 1.
0.
2. You both say 0. Okay, both of you. I think you are very
We're geniuses.
ungenerous. No, you're very ungenerous to the ANC. The ANC accomplished a lot more than you both abuse it for. The ANC actually succeeded in distributing 1%.
One mighty percentage.
One is more than 0.
That is huge. That's huge.
1%.
That's huge.
1%. Can you imagine? The target was 30%. 1%, right? In 5 years. 25 years after apartheid system had supposedly formally ended, how much of the land do you think had been redistributed? Same quiz. Start with you, Sister Nduku. After 25 years.
The same 1%.
Okay, and you, brother?
They now have 70%, so which means give or take
Look at
5%
you.
has
Look
been
at you.
added onto it.
Okay, yeah. The brother was using some
He is.
some
He
wisdom.
is.
He gave 5%. Okay. Actually, 10%.
Yeah.
So as we speak today in the year 2023, right? The European South Africans, which I said earlier on, 8% of the population still controls 72%. So we are very far off from realizing the dreams or benefits of the apartheid. So you can imagine how the poverty level in South Africa is. South Africa, according to a World Bank report, is the most, in terms of income distribution, the most unequal in the world, even worse than the United States of America. And obviously, we are all familiar that in recent years, there's been talk about the need to redistribute the land and to disregard the issue of compensation. Julius Malema's
I was about to say our brother Malema is...
Yes. Malema's Economic Freedom Fighters Party has been growing after each election cycle, because one of the things they've been talking about is nationalizing the land and nationalizing the major industries, mining and banking. So that has really got the African National Congress Party very worried. And in recent years, they too have been at least verbalizing and talking about this issue. And there was a debate over what to do about Section 25 of the South African Constitution. Section 25 says it talks about expropriation, but under certain conditions, which is it has to be equitable. There has to be compensation, and then as part of the compensation, the same formula that they used in Zimbabwe, which of course was not practical, which is willing buyer, willing seller.
Willing
Meaning,
seller.
If the people who control the land are not willing to sell, it means it's a non-starter. So that is the dilemma that is now being faced by South Africa. And then, of course, you have another issue in terms of corporate media. Corporate media dominates narratives in Western countries like the United States, but in South Africa, the same thing. So corporate media, when they control the narrative in South Africa, what are the issues when it comes to land redistribution? They don't talk about the justice of the whole fact. They don't talk about the fact that how are you going to compensate people who never paid for the land without compensating the victims of the
Process
dispossession, right?
process of
How
crime.
you
They don't talk about the stealing part.
absolutely, of course not.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah, no,
compensation.
no. We
So
don't
when they
steal.
say they didn't steal. So when you say when the European farmers say, "Oh, this is targeting Europeans," so it's sort of racist, right? They're not looking at the fact that, wait a minute, what about the fact that you're not even discussing compensation for the victims of dispossession who are African? Is that not the ultimate form
Sounds like
of
reparations.
racism? Oh yeah, that's a whole topic that we're going to talk to devote a show to. But here are the key points that the media also focus on. It will jeopardize agricultural production, right? It will destabilize the economy.
Sounds like our topic for next week.
Yep.
Yep.
It will turn South Africa into Zimbabwe, a failed
Yes.
economy.
States.
It will scare investors.
Investors.
It will threaten property rights, right? So it's only when Africans are dispossessed that we now start talking about property rights.
Property rights.
Why can we not retroactively go back to the era prior to the dispossession
When the stealing
and say,
happened.
okay, let's establish property rights going back to history and restore the properties?
Not just that, Brother Alimadi, but
Yes.
can we be at the table when we're making these decisions? Can the Africans be at the table so that we can
There
give
you
our
go.
opinion? Go ahead.
There you go. There you go.
Mm.
There you go. So that to me is a summary of the history of the dispossession in South Africa and where South Africa got to where it is today. So I go back to Brother Adesoji opening the show with Zimbabwe and mention the sanctions since you said 2001, 2002,
Connecting.
correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Those sanctions
Yes.
primarily, by the way, listeners who may not be familiar, the late Robert Mugabe has now joined the ancestors. Those sanctions are still in place
Yes, they are.
against Zimbabwe. The obvious reason is that those sanctions primarily were not really intended against Zimbabwe. They were, of
Can
course.
I ask a question, Brother
Yes.
Alimadi, as you continue to explain?
Yes.
Do you think these sanctions, as the West, as the imperialists claim, are meant to punish the government, or who exactly do this? Who ends up paying for the sanctions?
The sanctions are meant to, who used that term? Let's make squeeze the economy until it screams or something like that.
But who suffers when that
Yes,
happens?
that was
People, of course.
Yes,
that was
the people.
that was the UN Secretary for Commerce, Chester Crocker.
Did he say it
Okay,
with his
there you
full
go.
chest?
That's what he said. He said we have to make them squeal,
Right.
scream.
So when you do that, when the people suffer intensely, the people become disenchanted, the people rebel, right? And that's how you have regime change.
Regime
So the
change,
sanction,
yes.
of course, is to promote regime change by making the people suffer so intensely that they want to get rid of their government. And obviously, it's not worked decades, and yet the sanctions are still in place because the people who are suffering are, after all, African people.
Yeah.
So who cares about them really in the West? But the sanctions are also supposed to set a warning to the so-called African government in South Africa, in Namibia, and even in Kenya, where a lot of the land, decades after the struggle of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army,
Yep.
the land, still large tracts of land still owned by absentee landlords who live in Europe or their descendants live in Europe.
De la Mer.
That's one example, right? So that's where we are with the land challenge in South Africa. Obviously, it has to be resolved. And to me, what is the amazing thing is that, remember, was it 2008 when 2018 when European South Africans, Afrikaners, the Boers, came to the United States to lobby the Trump administration to sanction the ANC government because, as Trump himself put it in a tweet Trump tweeted that something needs to be done because white people are being killed
And
on a large scale.
we will dedicate a whole conversation on these sanctions because I want. Go ahead,
definitely.
brother.
I agree with you. I agree with you, sister. So Trump tweeted, Europeans are being killed on a large scale. Their land is being taken away. And I've instructed Secretary Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State, to look into this matter and take some action. And they had access here. They were being hosted by, who's that guy on Fox News? Name one of the right wingers. And then I'll say yes.
What's his name? Oh my God, his name escapes me now.
Yeah, the pretentious one who wears the bow tie. And I'm glad I don't even remember.
It's not Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's why I said just mention the names and then I'll come back. Tucker Carlson was the one who kept talking about this on his show, was interviewing these, right-wing white South Africans, and that's how Trump became involved. And so when you have a powerful European elite that is still thinking that it should, rather than do the opposite and say, this is time to reassess our privileges, right? After all, we talk about reconciliation in South Africa. You can't have reconciliation while you maintain these obnoxious levels of privilege at the same time. So instead of reflecting inwards, what can we do to give this reconciliation a better chance? They're still coming to the centers of imperialism, like the United States, to get assistance in extending this privilege that they enjoy in South Africa. So that's my sum up.
And as you hand over back to Adesoji, I will say, because we have an hour and a half to do our shows, but these conversations, there's so much we can talk about. So I'll encourage you all to look out on our platforms on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever we are posting them, on LinkedIn. For the extended conversation, we usually have extended conversations on Clubhouse, and join us. And that's where we can hear your observations, your suggestions, because the idea is to get solutions. Brother Adesoji.
Oh, yes. Speaking of South Africa, just north of South Africa and the northwest
Beautiful
corner
beaches too. Beautiful beaches.
Northwest corner of Africa is a story that no one tends to know about or think about. The place used to be known as Southwest Africa.
Correct.
But as of 1992 became known as Namibia, the land of Sandu Nyoma, the bastion of the Southwest African People's Organization.
Brother, you provoked me. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt.
Before you interrupt,
we can't contain it.
Hold on. Before you interrupt, let me just say, I am going to post a video that shows the beautiful beaches of Namibia. Brother, interrupt.
Okay. I want listeners to always remember Cuba's contribution to the liberation of Namibia and South Africa.
This is good.
So as you were speaking, that just came back in such an overwhelming way. I have to bring it up. Cuba sacrificed, I think people speculate that as many as 30,000 Cubans died in the wars of African liberation from the 1960s up to when Cuba finally pulled down its last soldiers, I think, around in the 1990s. But the Battle of Quito Cuanaval in 1987 was so
still
critical.
The stuff of legends.
The stuff of legend, when South Africa still occupied what it called Southwest Africa, which was called Namibia, when it occupied large parts of Angola and was supporting UNITA under Savimbi, the CIA agent, and the FNLA under Holden Roberto, the other CIA agent.
Turning one African brother against the other.
Exactly. And here are two key things. African countries, and we talk about what's the meaning of independence, had been, most of them, independent since the 1960s, and had stood there as the apartheid, the so-called apartheid invincible army, crushed African lives, women and children, attacking all the neighboring African countries, Mozambique, Angola, bombing them, killing them, and they had not done much. It took tiny Cuba to send its expeditionary army to Angola and the Battle of Quito Quinaval and destroy the South African army and force them to withdraw from Angola. And they realized, wait, these guys can actually pursue us all the way to South Africa. So they quit Namibia. They released Mandela, and the rest is history. So we should always never forget that instance. I know it's a bit of a diversion.
No, you are a mwalimu, and that is why you are a mwalimu. You take us through these routes that we need to go through. Thank you so much.
There is another part to that story, which is when the Cuban forces arrived in Angola. The terms of agreements, terms of reference was containment. But the commander of the Cuban army said, as long as I contain the South African Defense Force, I will continue to take L's. But if you allow me to unleash my forces against them, I can guarantee you in 2 years, you will no longer see them. Which culminated which culminated in the Battle of Kumbukeni-Reclaiming.
Excellent.
Now,
back to you.
Speaking of the final solution, in Europe, it is often discussed that the Holocaust is one of the most unseemly acts of cruelty against humanity. But little is said of the fact that what happened in Europe had already been tested by the same Germans in Namibia as of May 12, 1883, when they landed on the shores of Namibia beaches and Walvis Bay and proceeded to outline what is known as the Lebrifem, which is the land of the Iron Race. And what they met were people of the Hereros and the Namas.
Correct.
And suffice to say, they went into overdrive, which is we cannot live with these people. We are going to effectively exterminate them. And an extermination order was signed, which meant they had to kill everything moving.
Right.
Suffice to say, in 1 year and 6 months, they decimated the population. They chased the ones they couldn't kill into the desert. They poisoned wells and waterways.
Just for the people, Brother Adesoji, for the people who are into this current lifestyle that we live, just think Avatar. Go ahead, Brother Adesoji.
Yep.
Yes. And they poisoned waterways and proceeded
destroy the food stock.
Destroy the food stock, created concentration camps, gave them poisoned blankets so that they can have diseases and die. Now, how did we know about this? This matter came to a head when at the Nuremberg trial, Hermann Göring was on the stand. And when he was accused of genocide, he said, and these were his words, that we only perfected what you did in South Africa. You remember the Boer Wars with the concentration camp? So we only perfected whatever it is you did. And it comes back to a full circle.
No, but it's interesting you said that, because you're saying, don't stand here moralizing. You know, if you're going to execute us that the victors, justice, but not because you're any better than us. You also committed genocide. That's what he was saying. Well, go ahead.
To buttress what you just said, in fact, he said the history of Europe is littered with the idea of genocide. So we are not doing anything different.
Amazing.
Simply because we have been caught does not mean we are innocent nor guilty, neither are you. So it goes to show that the history of Africa has always been about the land, not about the people.
And the
If they can get
contemporary
rid of the
terms of
people,
Africa, yeah.
Right.
so if
And
they can get rid
contemporary
of the
Africa.
people,
Mhm.
if they can get rid of the people without anybody knowing about it, all well and good.
And
But history,
today, Namibia reflects, of course, what we have in South Africa, where 6% of the population is of European ancestry and also controls 72% of the land. And I just want to add something else to bring the US a little in this also, in a different context, but similar.
We're at 2 minutes to the.
Okay. Victor's justice, the fog of war. For anybody who's not familiar with that documentary, please watch that documentary about Robert McNamara. And he was interviewed, very interesting. And he said one thing very interesting. He said, in terms of World War II, it was Victor's justice. He said it was who won the war, who got to determine who was right, who was wrong. Had we lost the war, he said, we would have been lined up against the wall and shot like war criminals. So he was actually conceding that is not the issue of justice. It's about might is right. So I just wanted to interject that in.
Thank you.
and I'll add this to it. Here's the sad part. There is an article in the Namibian Constitution, Article 140,
Yes.
which says all laws which were in force immediately before independence shall remain in place until amended or repealed by an act of parliament, or until they are declared unconstitutional by a competent court. So, which means we've stole it, make us return it.
Yep. There you go.
And
What can we add?
so, comrades, your final thoughts.
Always
Well-
nice to be in conversation. We don't have enough time.
Yeah, we don't have time, but I
No.
think this is an issue that we should definitely
Yeah.
revisit in a part 2, maybe in a couple of
We should.
weeks
We
or
should.
a
This
couple
is
of
a big
months.
topic. So for me, I'll remind everyone you can join our Patreon community at patreon.com/Kumbukeni. You will see it's the same spelling as our YouTube channel, or you can be a subscriber and support this work at youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. And the goal this month is to hit 1,000 subscribers so that we can start generating income and support this work. Brother Adesoji, if you can close us out.
Yes, I would leave you with the words of Thomas Sankara, who said,
Brilliant.
"It is homeland or death.
Brilliant.
Homeland or death." And thank
Have
you
a
all
nice
for
day,
coming.
all.
Aluta
Thank you very
continua.
much.
That's what I
Victoria
used to
Seta.
say.
Victoria
Thank you
Seta.
all.
Thank you. Always good to be in
Thank you.
conversation with you, brothers.
Same here. Same here. Thank you very much for watching, and join us again next week. And till then, it is goodbye from me.
Kwaherini.